Matters with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
Almost 50 years ago, Paul, way back in 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire. It actually caught on fire, burned a couple of railroad trestles, I kid you not. And the reason the river caught fire is because it was so full of industrial waste and junk that it literally just went aflame when the conditions were right. That's how bad the industrial waste was in Cleveland. However, today we are dealing with other pollutants in our water that could endanger our health. And really, Paul, they could also endanger railroad trestles.
Let's talk about water quality first.
Okay.
So it's really important to understand that the what's in your water is it's I guess after some research, a lot of research taken from nearly 50,000 U.S. water utilities in 50 states, testing for 500 different contaminants, 267 were detected. This information comes from the Environmental Working Group.org, EWG.org. If you ever want to know a really good source of reliable information for things like, in this case, water quality, quality of bottled water, quality of food, quality of cosmetics and other household products, EWG.org is a source that you can rely on. So do use it whenever you have a question about which product or which source might be the least harmful or disruptive.
And one of the things they found, as you've indicated, Paul, is that we have hundreds of contaminants in our water. What's going on? Why is it so bad?
Well, nearly 19,000 public water systems detected, for example, lead in levels which would put a formula-fed baby at risk. 19,000 different public water systems.
Now, that's what's horrifying to begin with. As we know, with the water system being polluted, it's children, who are among the many, who are endangered.
As usual. You know, this is just something which is all too common, all too frightening, and despite the fact that the public utilities try to do, I am making the assumption they try to do the best job they can. The truth is that the standards that are set are simply not stringent enough to be able to protect us from, from the harmful contaminants that are found in the water.
So the two obvious questions are these. What are these contaminants, and how are they getting into the water?
Well, probably the single biggest contaminant, certainly in our waterways, is actually comes from the commercial farming techniques.
Really? So how is
fertilizer?
That? Fertilizer is inadvertently leaking into the water system?
Well, inadvertently.
Well,
because
I don't think any farmers out there,
let's put it this way.
Fertilizer into the water system.
You can't put fertilizer on the earth without putting it in the water supply.
So if we're having these big industrial farms which are using more mass techniques of producing farm products, it stands to reason they are using more harmful chemicals, more fertilizer, and other ingredients which seep into the water system. Is that right?
Absolutely. Billions and billions of pounds of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and fertilizers are being spread on the soil every single year.
Do we know if there's any kind of regulation at work there, effectively or otherwise?
Is there regulation?
Yeah, you would think so. If we're aware of this problem, you would think somebody would step up and say, well, we need to get a grip on this.
Well, whatever regulation there is allowing these poisons to be spread, on an annual basis. So is there regulation? Yes. Is the regulation sufficient? I don't think so.
That's what we're looking at right there. So we have farming. I have to assume then there are other industries who are contributing to this big problem with our water supply.
Yeah, there was a Safe Drinking Water Act that was passed in the early 70s, and the whole point of that was to try to keep the tap water safe. But so many chemicals are simply not either put on the list, not tested for. Remember, all this has to do with economics. It's the costs of things. And we tend not to invest in these type of safety protocols. We tend to want to find the least expensive methods of, for example, removing these chemicals and bacteria and parasites and whatnot, the microflora from the water, and we tend to want to do that, most cheaply, and so as a result of that, the investment tends to be short of the mark. In Europe, for example, chlorine is not put into the water supply. They recognize the harm that it causes in the long term, some people in the short term. So they use different methods of filtration. We'll get into that. I'm sort of previewing what we're going to talk about.
Leaping ahead a little bit. But also, we'll bring up the most obvious example right now, which is the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, which continues, by the way. One of their issues was not only trying to find a cheaper water supply, that's what led to the problem in the first place, but also their infrastructure was extremely dated. They had lead pipes. So when they were putting this new water supply through their dated pipes, the lead from the pipes was getting into the water also. So you had bad water being made worse before it got to consumers.
Yeah, I mean it's criminal what took place over there. Focusing on our area, the Northwest. So far we have some farsightedness. At least the public in general has prevented the use of fluoride in our water supply for very good reason, despite the fact that the American Dental Association and the FDA push. The bottom line is, and we'll talk about that as well coming up, the bottom line is fluoride. Mass medication has no place, for human consumption. Period. End of story.
Another thing you can do as part of your homework on this topic is go to YouTube and look for the videos of people setting their tap water on fire. There are various areas in the country, such as North Dakota, where fracking is going on, and that particular kind of mining, apparently, is putting natural gas into the water supply. I laugh because it's so ridiculous, not because it's not serious. And so you have videos of people pouring out tap water, setting a match to it, and it goes aflame because it's so full of these other ingredients now.
And the horrifying thing is that the companies that do this, that do the fracking, right, their position will be, well, there's no evidence that this actually hurts, human beings.
Until you're trying to apply your head and shoulders through, an inferno, then you'll find that maybe there's something wrong with your water supply in your shower.
It's the tobacco-like defense, right? Well, prove that it's harmful. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that a water that burns might have some contaminants in it that someone might be concerned about.
And you're right in terms of that analogy with the industry's reaction, which is kind of a shrug of the shoulders and them saying not us. However, now when you go to buy tobacco now, you pretty much have a skull and crossbones on the label. You know you're buying a dangerous product. You shouldn't have to have that kind of warning on your tap at home. You know, that shouldn't apply. So what can we do? What can we do to make our water safer?
Well, we filter it. I mean, you have to actually put some money aside, start saving now so that you can so you can install some type of filtration in the water. We'll talk about those options too throughout the show. But filtration is absolutely the only answer for a family and the action that should be taken.
Now, those are dramatic examples, like tap water going on fire. The situation in Flint where you have lead in the water, kids in particular are being impacted by that. But on a daily basis, I assume, Paul, even here in Portland and elsewhere, we have contaminants in our water which are doing us no good.
And the problem is that so many of the chemicals aren't even tested for. Remember, tests cost money. So again, our water in general is certainly, of reasonably decent quality. The problem is it just takes more money to identify the contaminants. And it takes more money to invest in non-chemical treatment of the water. And the public is simply, I think for the most part, either unaware or simply really doesn't have the time to pay attention because they're, just occupied with food, shelter, and clothing. But the bottom line is fluoride and chlorine have absolutely no place whatsoever in the water supply, especially because, in short, fluoridation, there's absolutely no overwhelming evidence. In fact, all the evidence is totally underwhelming that fluoride can do anything for reducing the cavities in people. But beyond that, the other risks of are especially to kids have been documented. And it's just, mass medication of a population is simply unwarranted.
I know you'll cover this more in depth later in the hour when we talk about how much water we're drinking. But do you think the turn to bottled water, which Americans are doing in such a dramatic way, has in part to do with some awareness about wanting a safe alternative to tap water?
Well, bottled water really in the beginning was all about marketing.
Oh, it sure is. And I have a point to make with that.
Pepsi
I'm going
and
somewhere with this.
Coca-Cola and, the two largest soda makers and distributors basically are also the largest bottled water distributors as well.
They are. And there are two particular brands, Aquafina and Dasani, I think it is. They're both manufactured by Coke and Pepsi, respectively.
Straight tap water.
And as of 2017, Paul, recently, we now, as Americans, consume more bottled water than we do soft drinks. We consume 42 gallons of bottled water per capita in the country. Every single one of us, supposedly, is consuming 42 gallons of bottled water. Forget all other sources of water. That's stuff we buy off the shelf.
Yeah, and we've talked about the environmental cost of bottled water is something to consider. Because what do you do with all the empty plastic bottles? Now, there are many cities that are recycling, such as in Portland, which is wonderful. So that can be recycled. But you can also be exposed to the plastic chemicals that exist, BPA, for example, that are present in some of the containers, plastic containers that bottlers are using. There are some safer, some not so safe. EWG.org would be a source to uncover the safest bottled water product, which is kind of cool.
According to some sources, about 54% of plastic water bottles are recycled. Now, that doesn't sound too bad on paper, but if we're buying many millions of those every year, millions of those bottles, that means about 46% are not being recycled, and that's a lot. That's a whole bunch of dirty plastic bottles out there creating havoc.
Yeah. And, depending on the area, of course, we were talking about what are the largest contaminants. The largest contaminant is fertilizer, from commercial farming groups. Some states have more of a problem than others, but you can see the writing on the wall that the more fertilizer, the more commercial fertilizer, the more pesticides, the more herbicides, the more fungicides that are being spread, the more potential for contamination of the water supply, underneath the ground, let alone the runoff into rivers, which is enormous. The rivers, they're finding, rocket fuel. They're finding, and
rocket fuel.
Yeah, they discover this. They discover this via not just taking samples of the water, but also the wildlife that exists in the rivers and streams. They're finding medications like antidepressants that are in the water supply. They're and of course the nitrates from the fertilizers. I mean, they're finding thousands of chemicals in various concentrations in the water supply. And if you think for 1 minute that the government has a handle on which concentration causes which condition, then you have another thing coming.
Well, let's put a happy face on this. Look on the optimistic side.
Not yet.
If there are antidepressants in the water, at least the water supply won't suffer from anxiety, right?
Oh, my gosh.
That's one good thing right there.
Yeah.
Now, also,
yes, boo.
A friend of mine recently gifted me some plants, and I'm not used to taking care of plants, but this is good news. If there's fertilizer in the tap water that I'm using to water those plants, they should be pine trees.
Oh my God!
In short order. So,
where's these one-liners? We got to get where's the boo line?
So the fact that the water is toxic and will probably kill us all in short order, there you go. At least there are those. There is positive aspects.
There is a glory note. There is a happy note, to this, at least for us at this stage. God knows where it's going to get to if they simply don't, turn it off in the fields. But filtration. And you have to understand what the best mediums are, and I'm going to share that with you, throughout the show.
Okay, when you say filtration, is this stuff, and as you said, you'll cover it more in detail later, but is this stuff you can actually just buy and attach to your tap?
Yes.
And that way you're guaranteed a healthier water supply all the way around. Do you have to buy one, say, for the tap in your kitchen, then one in your bathroom, and maybe your shower? Does every one of them need a separate tap, or can you hook them up to a central source?
Well, you can hook them up to a central source. I mean, of course, but central source filtration is a little bit more expensive than on each, individual tap. But it's, in my view, let's put it this way. That's what I do at my home. I have a system, on the water supply that actually comes into the house and goes through several different filtration substrate, and then so that and the reason that's important is because the use of chlorination and fluoridation, but chlorination in particular, when you take a shower and you heat that water up, chloroform is one of the chemicals that's formed, in that process because of the chlorine. And you know what you do with chloroform.
And I think many people...
You embalm dead bodies with it.
And you might become one if you continue using this tainted stuff.
And showers are where a lot of the exposure to contaminants both in the water and as a result of chemical reaction from the chemicals that are put in.
And I think that's problematic for many of us because many of us, perhaps including myself, assume that, well, as long as we're not imbibing the tainted water, we're okay. Showering, no problem. Put that in your washcloth and wipe your face, you're going to be okay. But from what you're telling me, no, Paul, it's every bit as dangerous.
And then other types of contaminants in the water, include, the industrial processing of fertilizers itself. The contaminants, one of the main results is concentration of lead. Is a contaminant in the processing of fertilizer, and the crazy thing is that the fluoride that many cities and towns put in their water system, right, contain the runoff. Right, the side effect process from production of fertilizer.
One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.